Have you ever stopped to think about how many things you've started and never finished? Maybe it was a course, a project, a New Year's resolution. At first, there's that spark, that rush of, this time, it's really happening. But then the days go by, and you just stop. No clear reason. You just stop, and that starts to weigh on you, not like a scream, but like a quiet guilt that keeps piling up. The truth is, this messes with how we see ourselves. Like every unfinished thing is whispering, see? You can't do it. But this pain isn't just about discipline. A lot of times, it's the body asking for rest, and the mind refusing to listen. Psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk talks about this. When there's trauma or emotional overload, the body gives up before the mind does. And there's more. Our brains are addicted to beginnings. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman explains that dopamine, the pleasure of action, comes from anticipation, not from finishing. In other words, the thrill of starting doesn't last. And when that thrill fades, so does the motivation to keep going. Then you start thinking you are the problem, that finishing things defines your worth. But as Carl Rogers said, real growth comes from acceptance, not performance. Still, the world only claps for outcomes, not for the quiet effort of continuing, even when no one's watching. In the end, every abandoned project becomes a kind of mirror, a painful reminder of everything you didn't finish. And little by little, you find yourself living in that in-between place, between the desire to be more and the fear of not being enough. But what if this struggle to finish isn't failure at all? What if it's a signal, a quiet invitation to look deeper? You know that rush you get when you start something new, like it's now or never. That burst of excitement feels addictive. It gives you this sense of control, of possibility. Like this time, everything's finally going to move forward. But here's what no one really says. That feeling doesn't last. And when it fades, what's left? We've gotten used to relying too much on that initial high. But starting on a high note means nothing if you don't have something more solid to keep you going. It's like inflating a balloon with your own breath. It might float for a moment, but it deflates just as quickly. What keeps things going isn't the intensity, it's consistency. That quiet, steady choice to keep showing up even when the sparkle's already gone. And here's another thing. Continuing also means exposing yourself, because as long as you quit halfway through, you can still tell yourself it might have worked out. But when you finish something, the maybe disappears. Reality shows up. And a lot of people would rather live in the almost than risk a clear failure, because almost still holds a little hope. Finishing doesn't. In a world where everything fights for your attention, that fear gets mixed with distraction. Every notification, every short video, every new tab, they become perfect excuses to avoid the hard part. And without even realizing it, your brain starts learning. If it's uncomfortable, just walk away. Easy pleasure starts to win over deep focus. We've been trained to measure progress only by what gets done, by what's delivered in the end. But maybe the more honest question is, was I fully there while doing it? Because finishing isn't about speed or brilliance. It's about the ability to return, day after day, even when no one's watching, even when the motivation disappears. It's about not abandoning yourself in the middle of the process. Sometimes the block shows up, and you don't even know why. Everything's there. Time, energy, ideas. But inside, it's like something just locks up. Starting is easy, but continuing feels almost impossible. And maybe that has less to do with laziness, and more to do with what you learned back then, without even realizing it. A lot of us grew up hearing that we're only valuable when we get it right, when we bring home good grades, when we finish strong. Over time, your brain starts linking the act of finishing with something dangerous, judgment, because finishing is when people can finally evaluate you. And if you carry that story inside you, your emotional system might start protecting you from reaching the end, not out of weakness, but out of fear. Fear of showing your work, and it not being good enough. Fear of confirming something you already suspect about yourself. There's another layer too. We often confuse motivation with emotional clarity. Some days, you want to create, but inside, everything's a mess. It's like trying to write with a head full of smoke. And in that state, even the smallest task feels overwhelming. Your body shifts into defense mode. So you freeze, not because you don't care, but because you're trying to sprint through an emotional fire. And here's a detail most people miss. At the start of any project, there's always a reason. Something symbolic. It could be freedom, recognition, growth. But over time, you forget what that why was. The thing becomes just another task, just another item on the to-do list. And of course, it loses meaning, because no one can keep pushing through something that no longer speaks to what they feel. So, before trying to start again, maybe it's more important to remember. Remember what this meant to you, what this project symbolized, what you wanted to change, heal, escape, or rebuild. Because without that emotional thread, all your effort turns into noise. But when you reconnect with your why, even the silence starts to make sense. Maybe you're not failing. Maybe you're just tired. But not the kind of tired a good night's sleep can fix. It's a different kind of exhaustion. The one that comes from constantly trying to prove you're worthy. As if every finished project is another way to say, "See, I can do it." And when you don't finish, here comes the weight, the judgment, that sinking feeling of falling behind. But most of the time, it's not a lack of effort, it's too much pressure. And living in that constant pressure drains your energy before you even begin. You get stuck in a cycle of expectations and guilt, and every time you walk away from something, you're not just leaving a project behind, you're losing a piece of your own self-trust. It's like you're trying to build a temple, a sacred space, something that reflects who you are, or who you hope to become. But you stop halfway, not because you don't believe, but because you're afraid of how it'll be received. And slowly, you start to believe maybe you never should have started at all. That maybe this temple didn't even deserve to exist. But maybe finishing has nothing to do with performance. Maybe it's an act of freedom, a way of telling yourself you don't have to prove anything anymore. That you can finish something not because you want applause, but because you want closure, because you want to hear yourself again. And if you knew you'd repeat this cycle forever, start, get excited, freeze, give up, start again, get excited, freeze, give up. If that were your eternal loop, what would you do differently right now? That's the provocation of the eternal return. The idea that life isn't something we're waiting for. It's already happening. And maybe the consistency you've been chasing doesn't come from pressure, but from accepting that you're already on the path. If this video made sense to you, if at any point you felt seen, consider subscribing and leaving a like. This is about building something with presence and continuing, even slowly, all the way to the end.